Testing, testing.
But that's an
Testing sound.
So it was
Owl seems to be reacting.
okay, perfect.
Nice job, everybody.
I'm gonna get a degree in technology after this.
A quick repeat, point of clarification, are people online able to get minutes as well?
Yes.
Okay, let's repeat this real quickly, folks. Sorry. Certification Standards and Practices Advisory Council encourages the public to participate in council deliberations. Persons wishing to participate should identify themselves to the chair or the administrative officer prior to the council's consideration of the matter in which the persons are concerned. Any persons wishing to participate in council discussion will be recognized by the chair, including the normal council parliamentary procedure. We discourage public comment on personnel matters and ask that you discuss these issues in private with the chair. The Montana Board of Public Education is a professional development unit provider. Attending a Certification Standards and Practices Advisory Council meeting may qualify you to receive professional development units. Please complete the necessary information on the sign-in sheet if you're applying for professional development units. Next, we need to approve today's agenda. Does everybody have a copy of the agenda?
And Mr. Chair, I would note on your agenda today for item number 5, you'll see that Jennifer Burns is on there. She's actually unable to join us on Zoom today. She's ill, so Christy will make that presentation. Where if you're amenable, I would recommend then swapping items 4 and 5. I think it'd be really important for you guys to get the practice 101 discussion before you make decisions on the scores. We had it the way we did because of schedules, but now we don't have that issue. So I would make those recommendations before you adopt the agenda.
Sounds like friendly amendments to me. If someone would make a motion incorporating that idea, that'd be great.
I'll make a motion to move item 5 before item 4 on the agenda.
And other than that, accept the agenda, correct?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Thanks, Ken. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to the vote. Those in favor of the agenda, please respond by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Okay, the ayes have it. The agenda is approved. Next item of business is with the October 6th, 2022 meeting minutes. We need to approve those minutes if we could. I'll accept the motion.
Move to approve the October 6th meeting minutes.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second, excellent people. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor of approving the minutes, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The minutes have been approved. Welcome to all visitors. We have visitors in the room and we vacated for their welcome, but welcome to those of you online. We appreciate you joining us today. Item 1 on the agenda is an executive committee report. Been an interesting few months for the Certification Standards and Practices Advisory Council. Council members have been watching the proceedings of the legislature to see how things happen. That actually led to many of us participating online, and I went and testified just against one bill in particular. That would be House Bill 231. It's a bill that would eliminate this advisory council. I suggested to the Education Committee that was considering the bill that our group of professional educators representing trustees, representing administrators, classroom teachers, specialists, counselors, school board trustees, did I forget someone? And Brent, good grief. and educational preparation programs, that this body served a valid purpose. And I guess I would just like to say on the record to all of you today that I certainly appreciate your work. I appreciate your support. I think what we do has value. I've had dreams over the last couple of weeks of what comes of Class 8 licensure, for example, if the advisory council is no longer there. The work will still need to be done, and I think obviously there will be means of doing so. But I do, and I didn't say this to the legislature, and I wish I would have. I'm sure you can all relate in joining CSPAC. It takes a while to get your feet on the ground. It takes a while to understand what exactly it is we're doing. And I think for me, it took a couple of years. Some of you, it might not take that long, but when we're doing things like looking at Chapter 55 on full accreditation, trying to help with Chapter 57 on education licensure, certainly with Chapter 58 and the education preparation programs and how that looks in Montana. We always have an eye on students in our state and what's good for education, what's good for public education, and what's good for students, their families, and Montana communities. And I would argue ultimately what's good for the Montana economy and our future as both as citizens and potential employees for jobs heretofore unknown. There is a learning curve there. There's some institutional knowledge there. And the governor's bill is to eliminate this council based upon fiscal considerations. It's a red tape reduction act. And yet fiscally, the fiscal note that came out said there would be no substantial difference in costs. So council members, I submit to you that I appreciate everything you do. I think we have value in the state, and I shudder to think what happens when someday a group of people is pulled together, hopefully representing the same diversity that we represent in the educational community, and are tasked to do things that, quite frankly, I worry about that learning curve. So that's my reflection today with you. It's been a tumultuous month, I think, for me. And like I told the legislative committee, I feel I have no dog in this fight. I will be leaving CSPAC regardless of legislative action. I'm retiring as a teacher this year. And I think that gave me the freedom to be very frank with legislators and try to share what I see as an incredible value that this group provides to try to serve the Montana Board of Public Education, a group of volunteers just like you all are, who are tasked with helping steer public education in the state. And so I thank you. I appreciate your efforts, and McCall, who was there as well as an informational witness, answered questions that the legislators had. Anyone that didn't see the hearing, I was just super impressed with your professionalism, quite honestly, your passion for education comes through in everything you do. And I don't think we as a council necessarily, I think sometimes we take that for granted, and it's been put very clearly in my mind last month plus that we shouldn't take anything for granted. So thank you for your work. And council members, with that, I think that concludes my report. Moving on in the agenda, let's turn to McCall for an update on the Board of Public Education, please. Executive Director Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to come back to the discussion that we just had about House Bill 231, but I have a couple other updates, and then I do want to have a little bit of a discussion. So I'm gonna move that to the end of my comments. But be thinking, keep that in the back of your mind because we will come back to it. I do want to give a huge shout out before I make my comments to Dr. Lawrence and her team at University of Montana here in the College of Education. We're super fortunate to be able to be on a campus. It's really nice. Usually we're in the Capitol, which is also beautiful and great. But it's nice to actually be out in the field. So really grateful for them for providing us the space to meet here today. I'm going to provide some updates today on the administrative rulemaking revisions, the board's undertaking, the field by literacy that I know I've talked a little bit about, but have some exciting news. And then we'll end with some legislative updates. With the board's January 12th and 13th meeting, the board approved the notice of adoption for Title 10, Chapter 58, which is the Educator Preparation Program Standards. The notice of adoption is actually going to be published today, so you'll be able to find that on the Secretary of State's website, and we'll also post that on our website. We'll then start working on the replacement pages. We actually write those. So what you see when you go to the administrative rulemaking page is written by us. And so we have to compile all of the current rules, the changes made by the superintendent, and then the changes made beyond those rules by the superintendent all together to create the administrative rules that you see on the Secretary of State's website. And the new rules will be effective July 1 of this year. Additionally, the board concluded responding to comments for Title 10, Chapter 55, which are the standards of accreditation. The board will take final action on the notice of adoption at their meeting March 9th and 10th. And then again, we will do that whole process over again. The notice of adoption will be published on March 24th, and those rules will also be effective on July 1. I want to share a few highlights from the decision made by the board regarding the accreditation standards that you all have made recommendations around. The board retained the current ratio language and standards for principals, superintendents, library media services, school counselors, and elementary class size. I should note for elementary class size, there were some changes made in that section, but they did keep the 1.5 hour per student ratio, which I think was, I don't want to say the entire argument made by opponents, but the crux of a lot of the argument. The board also approved new rule 3, which was regarding mentorship and induction, something that you guys did a lot of work and research around. And then third, they retained current language in the middle school electives. If you remember your meeting in October, you guys had a long conversation around middle school electives. And so you'll see those, that information retained the current language. And I think, Mr. Elder, Chair Elder, you commented on this a little bit, but I think the fact that you all took so much time to review those and make recommendations means something. I think your work is really important. I think as a group, you have such a vast expertise in public education. And I think the fact that you all with your different viewpoints were able to come together and make so many good recommendations on 57, 58, and 55 is really extraordinary. So I think you should be proud of yourselves for the recommendations you were able to make. And given the short amount of time that you even had with the rules, like you saw them and you turned around and made recommendations. And I think that's pretty impressive. I should also note that the superintendent has requested to open the standards for English language learners, math, and world languages. I know I've already seen an email go out to stakeholders around people participating on task forces and committees. So if any of you have interest in that, let me know and I will forward you that application. I think it's really important that we have people participating in that work. You all know this better than anyone. And so if there are people that you know who have a background in EL, math, or world languages, please let us know. We'd love to at least get them the application for their consideration. And now I'm going to move to the seal of biliteracy. We've talked a little bit about it here, but I do want to mention that it is live. We are taking applications. It's on our website. Students can take advantage of this year, which feels so exciting. if you guys don't remember, it's an award given by a school in recognition of students who have studied and attained proficiency in 2 or more languages by high school graduation. You can find all this information on our website. We do have it separated by world languages and native languages. We recognized early on that native languages are different than other world languages. They are not assessments for native languages often in the same way that there are for world languages. And so we wanted that process to be very similar to what the class 7 licensure process looks like. So that is a little different, and you can see that on our website. We worked really hard to get this off the ground this year, so if you have contact with any language teachers in your schools or just friends or community, please let them know if they don't know about this. Please have them contact me. And if they do know about this, please encourage them to have a student participate this year. Students do have to apply by May 1st. And they apply right to the Board of Public Ed office. And then finally, I'm just going to give a brief update, maybe not so brief, related to the legislature. As you know, Board of Public Ed doesn't engage too much in general legislative priorities. Really, our support or opposition has to do with our constitutional authority. We really don't stray far from that. Of course, we have our budget request, which I'll remind you of briefly here. And then I'll highlight a few pieces of legislation that are on our radar and that we're tracking very closely. So the board has 3 budget requests this session. The first is for $10,000 to fund basic operations. I should also note that our budget is less than $400,000 total. Half of it comes from state special revenue fees, which is teachers who get initially licensed or renewed. That all comes to the Board of Public Ed, about half of our budget. Then the other half is general fund. So the $10,000 would really be directed towards things like professional development, travel, administrative rulemaking costs. That's something that we previously didn't pay for. And we have been paying for those the last couple of years. The cost is somewhat minimal, but $2,500 to us is kind of a big deal. So we're adding this in there in hopes that we'll get additional funding to help cover some of those costs. And I do want to talk a little bit about professional development fees. I think for all of you, we're very lucky that you have organizations in the state who bring you together and you all have discussions with colleagues who are similar or have the same job as you do, maybe not in the same location and there are differences, but generally like there are superintendent conferences, there are trustee conferences, there are teacher conferences, and that doesn't exist statewide for board members or for staff. And so for us, those conferences are usually, across the US, it's countrywide. And so there is just an additional cost to be able to participate in those types of things. And there was a time where Montana was a member of the National Association of State Boards of Education, but that cost was just too high and there's no way that we'll get back to that place. But even as non-members, I think it's still so important for us to try to get our board members as much professional development as possible. So that's something that we've been trying to prioritize as well. Our second budget request is an additional $10,000 per year, so a total of $35,000 for legal costs. And we've talked a lot about legal costs, license cases, licensure cases that have come to the board have increased. Our legal counsel also helps us with administrative rules and other, research, other types of things. And those costs have increased over the last few years. Last year for fiscal year 2022, we actually reached the $25,000 by March. So there are just things that, and then the rest we had to pay for out of operating. So there are things that we would like to do that we often don't reach out to our legal counsel for because we know it's going to be an additional cost that we may not be able to be able to pay for. And then third, this is probably the biggest change for us, but the board agreed to support Superintendent Arnson's request to move the teacher licensure fees from the Board of Public Education to the Office of Public Instruction. And so as I mentioned in the beginning, Board of Public Ed currently gets all of the state special revenue related to teacher licensure fees. The superintendent would like to move those to OPI in order to pay for the new licensure system. We have agreed to that process, I will say, and the governor's office has been kind enough to backfill us in their budget with general fund. So at this point, the superintendent just needs to run a bill to do that because it is in statute. But once that's done, the governor's office, like I said, has at least backfilled us so that we wouldn't lose any of that funding. And I should actually note that that's in the governor's budget, and so are our other two requests, which is a big deal. And I think that is a good sign for us, hopefully. Our budget hearing is actually next Wednesday, February 1st. So if anyone's itching to watch the joint appropriations subcommittee on education, it'll be at 8:30 on February 1st. So a few pieces of legislation I just want to kind of quickly run through that we're watching really closely. House Bill 197 from Carlson is a constitutional amendment to Article 10, Section 9 of the Montana Constitution. And basically what it does is it adds specific language for the Board of Regents that states the board may not exercise any power that conflicts with any other provision of the Constitution or that conflicts with state law. So this bill hasn't been heard yet, but like I said, we're watching it very closely. And although this isn't specific to the Board of Public Ed, it's still in the same Article 10, Section 9 also encompasses the Board of Public Ed. And really, because we're so similar, anything that happens to the Board of Regents could potentially set precedent for the Board of Public Ed. And so we're gonna be watching any of those types of bills that have anything to do with Article 10, Section 9, as they come forward. House Bill 203 and House Bill 214, these are kind of being labeled as like the flexibility bills. And what the bills do is they really clarify the laws around out of district attendance and remote learning. That was all really blurred in statute pre-COVID. And then I think we all knew that there was a very clear difference during COVID and now after. So these bills really just make clarifications in that way. Although House Bill 203 does a little bit more than just clarify. It really now sets up a process for children who live in a district and who want to attend a different district. Now that district of residence has to pay the district of attendance a certain percentage of A&B. And that was never the case before. There was always just agreements, kids moved from one district to the other, and the A and B stayed in the district of residence. And now there will be some A and B cost sharing between districts. I'm just glad I'm not on the fiscal end of that. Seems very complicated. But that bill, those two bills have moved out of House Education and are going to the House floor. House Bill 259 from Deming. This bill was up on Monday, and I actually went in and opposed it. It allows the school board of trustees to hire anyone as a teacher, regardless of licensure or background. I oppose this bill for a number of reasons, but mainly because the Board of Public Ed has constitutional authority and general oversight over public schools in Montana. We have been given authority, powers and duties to set educator licensure laws and rules. And this bill totally circumvents that process and says now that people in our classrooms no longer have to be licensed. And I think one of the core tenets of education in Montana is that there are people teaching your students by themselves in a classroom that they are licensed or under an emergency authorization. And I understand, I understand that like the emergency authorization is, you know, pretty flexible and they don't have a license either, but at least we can track them. And we have an opportunity to, you know, talk with those people and see if they do enjoy being a teacher and get them on a pathway to licensure. This process is being set up in this bill. We can't track these people at all. They have no license. They are just being employed by the district. So I think there are some unintended consequences with this bill. For example, there's a rule or there's a law right now that says if you are teaching in a district, you have to submit your license or certificate with the county superintendent within 60 days in order to be paid. You don't have a license, you don't get paid. So there are just some nuances of this bill that I don't think have been thought through. And I think for many reasons, I don't think it's the bill is good. It was, like I said, it was heard in House Education on Monday and they haven't done executive action yet. And then a bright spot, Senate Bill 70 by O'Brien. This bill revises the Quality Educator Loan Assistance Program. It removes the critical quality educator shortage area, which just basically means the endorsement areas. You get really confused by shortage area, but it's basically the endorsement areas that used to have to be required. It really opens up the pool of applicants now, and it is only determined by location. So I think that they will see hopefully an increase in people who take advantage of that program. And then Senate Bill 129 from Temple. I think this bill is interesting. It revises the laws around compulsory attendance. I think on the High Line, they've had some issues with students who are attending school before the age of 7 and after the age of 16, because they can't make them come to school because compulsory attendance is 7 to 16. And what this bill does is it basically says, if you're enrolled, you have to go to school. It doesn't change the compulsory attendance law, but it says if you are enrolled, your parents enroll you, you're expected to be there. And it gives school districts the ability to then track and hold these families accountable. And then last, I do want to circle back to the conversation around House Bill 231. As Chair Elder said, it only took back, heard last week, it passed out of the House Education Committee. I don't know where it lives right now, but I anticipate it'll head to the floor likely next week. But I think it's really important to have a little bit of a discussion here this morning, because I would imagine you all have some questions or thoughts around the bill. And I think it would be really good to hear from all of you, just kind of initially what your thoughts are, how you feel about it. But with that, I also want to kind of think forward, because if this bill should pass, your last meeting will be in April. And at that meeting, I think it would be really important for you all to make recommendations to the Board of Public Ed on specific elements of CSPAC that you think need to be retained in whatever a new advisory council or committee might look like. I think there are a lot of different things that you guys could certainly make recommendations to the board around. And I think that's maybe where we should focus some of this on, just because I think that's where you can make a difference. And so with all that, I'll open it up to you guys, see if you have any questions on anything I mentioned this morning. Certainly also would answer questions on 231 or any thoughts you have about how we move forward with that bill. Just let me know.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'd like to start with our discussion.
I guess I'm wondering, so seemed like part of the crux of the argument was to eliminate it from statute, that there was a new requirement to have an advisory council. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, what's that gonna do to the Board of Public Education's workload? Like, the kinds of things that we do, where is that gonna go? That's kind of my first question. And then the second point I've been kind of mulling over is just, I mean, the board has the ability not to reappoint us if they don't like what we have to say. I'm kind of wondering why that's not being utilized. Because it seems like there is a system in place to, we serve at the, I'm trying to do the right word, at the board's pleasure, right? Or their approval, and we can ask to be reappointed and they can say no. So it seems like they already have the ability to change who's on the board and bring in other perspectives. And at the hearing, it seemed pretty clear from your testimony and questions from the legislators that the work is not going to go away. And they're still going to need to bring people together. So I guess I'm kind of wondering why they didn't try to modify the statute rather than eliminate it completely, if they want to expand the scope of who should be.
I think that's a really good question. I want to start by making very clear. This bill was not requested by the Board of Public Ed.
Right.
We frankly found out about it like the week before it was introduced. We were not consulted, we were not asked our thoughts. It was just, this is coming, wanted to give you a heads up. And so one of the things you're talking about, like revising the statute and adding flexibility, are things that I would have absolutely rather done than see this fact be completely eliminated. But we weren't given that opportunity. And I think we tried to make some of those points during testimony to the committee. And I think it's predetermined at this point what is going to happen with the bill. And so I don't think there was interest in having any type of changes made to it to make it fit what we wanted. I think to your points around like reappointment and the work that you guys do, I definitely have a little bit of concern around that as well. Because it just means that we're gonna have to create those committees and or groups to look at the same things that you guys did. And the board has not even had a conversation about any of this yet, so I have no idea like what they're thinking. I mean, do they want to have one council that does code of ethics? Do they have one council that does class 8? I don't know. I have no idea. So I can't answer some of those questions yet because I would only be making assumptions. But I do know that someone's gonna have to do it. And maybe it is the Board of Public Ed. And yeah, that will add more time to our meetings. And if that's the route they choose, I hope they understand that they're adding more work to their own plates. We have a lot going on right now. And as I talked about today, we've got 3 rule revisions coming. We've got chapter 57 internships we have to reopen. Like there's a lot of stuff happening. So I can remind them of that every step of the way. But at the end of the day, they'll make the decisions. And they have to decide what they want their workload to look like too. And like all of you, they are volunteers who meet 6 times a year. I don't know if that was a good answer to your question.
I had dinner with a retired state leader this last week, and when he heard about the bill, he wasn't aware of it, about House Bill 231. What is the bill? It would take CSPAC and take it out of statute. And his response was, well, that sounds like a good idea. And I thought, why would you say that? So I asked him, what makes this a good idea? What am I not seeing? And he said, well, in general, if it's in statute, it's so much more rigid and less flexible and hard to modify or hard to change with changing times. And I see that perspective. That makes sense to me. I think what my thought as I'm thinking about how you go forward is, and I think I mentioned it in my report, it's the institutional knowledge that we're able to bring to the meetings. And that is, you can have the best intention. When I joined this advisory council, I thought, I've been teaching for 20+ years. I can do this. This will be great. And I came here and I did chapter 58, chapter 57, accredited educator preparation program. What is all this stuff? So even I had a steep learning curve and I wanted to participate and wanted to be there. So what I wrestle with, Dave, is how you pull a group of well-intentioned educators, because I do think the Board of Public Ed will still look to experts in the field for assistance. But how much help can you be when you can't wrap your head around the task that's before you? And suddenly I think you become a rubber stamp where someone else is going to have to do the work. You're going to come in, soak it up and say, yeah, great, but not be able to engage and maybe make recommendations to the Board of Public Ed as has been done historically. And I guess that's my fear. Yeah, I don't know. Thank you for opening with a critical question. Other council members? Thoughts, questions, please.
I would just say that I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions, but it does feel rather moot at this point, you know. So I think what has been said already pretty much sums it up, but since it doesn't seem to make any difference at this point, I guess, again, as McCall said, all we can hope to do is just look forward to what kind of system or structure a council might be formed to be advisory. And I mean, it seems, I understand your point about the more rigidity of actually being in statutes, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem like it has, I've only been to one meeting, but it doesn't seem overly structured or rigid in that basically it's the work is outlined that needs to be done, the times that this council meets are outlined, and other than those two broad things, there really isn't much else that is specified. So it seems like council that meets regularly and has specified tasks would be the same information that would need to be created for any future council. And so it is very perplexing and curious and just very unusual, I would think, that you're dissolving one group will need to reform another group of groups. Basically the same work and the same tasks or guidelines as far as meeting times. So it is very curious and perplexing, and the actual aims or goals for making this same change are rather obscure, and it does seem like the actual purposes that are hoping to be achieved have not really been reiterated or been transparent in that what the purpose of doing this seems to be behind the scenes and not really.
Thank you, Jill. Great points. I almost, one thing that Executive Director Flynn mentioned at the testimony that I thought I hadn't thought about, that I thought was really powerful was that every time we meet, we have been for the past few years on Zoom in a public forum. So there's incredible transparency there. The work that we do is open to the public. And so I guess one of my recommendations would be that the board, whatever they decide to do, they keep that public face there and present, because it is public education. And we have parents and we have students that care about what happens. We have teachers and community members that care about what happens. So to keep that, I think that's something that could potentially be lost when suddenly you have an ad hoc committee just getting together to do this. And I think when you're talking about educator preparation programs and what the higher education units within the state are doing to prepare teachers for the classroom, I think that's something that a lot of people have a stake in, and it needs to be public and not behind, not even closed doors, but just kind of with a shroud of, not a shroud of overt secrecy, but implicit secrecy. Excellent, thank you.
I guess my thoughts, I think what makes the CSPAC unique is that, there's a number of people on this committee that are very close to the students. There are 3 teaching positions, and a special position, and all of those people are working directly with kids every single day. And obviously there's post-secondary rep, a trustee rep, and admin rep. You look how that contrasts with the Board of Public Education makeup. A lot of those people have been out of the classroom for a significant amount of time. That doesn't mean that they don't have experience in education. They absolutely do. They come from backgrounds that qualify them for those positions. But I think they're, I mean, just my own experience in education, the further I moved away from the classroom, that does change your perspective on things. And so I think what makes this group of people unique is that they, the multiple perspectives, and that can really transfer to important advice for the Board of Public Education that they may not have considered. And so I would hope that in the future, group of people would really encompass some of the same things, and that it doesn't, it's not super helpful to get a bunch of administrators together, so to speak, to talk about what's happening directly in classrooms. So, or, to exclude the post-secondary view from the conversation. And so I think that is one of the probably original reasons that CSPAC was created, was to ensure that those voices were heard by the Board of Public Education. So I would certainly hope that they would consider those kind of things as they report.
I don't think it's a stretch to say this is happening over the concept of equity. And we, throughout my career, I've asked myself, use the metaphor of, am I going to die on this hill? And you probably died on a hill, in my opinion, and I'm 100% okay with it. It's unfortunate, but I think we died on a hill.
It was worth starting off.
Man, I'm trying to do it again. I mean, nothing would change my opinion, and even when we compromised to the level we did, I would definitely die.
Noted, sir. Thank you.
I'd die with you, Trent. We were unanimous.
We were.
So, Mr. Chair, I think, you guys started providing a few good thoughts. Keep thinking about, that list of different elements, and at your next meeting, maybe we'll have a little work session where we can put it on the screen, come up with a bunch of ideas, and then you all can take action on that to make it a formal recommendation to the board, something that we can get to them for their meeting in May. How does that sound? Does that work? Okay. I do want to move on though, 'cause you do have to take action on your mission and goals and bylaws. It seems like we've been working on these for a while. But you'll see in front of page 14 of your packet,
Mhm.
are the, goals. So we'll do the mission and goals first. In red are some of the key changes that you all suggested as we went through some of the changes, cleanup of language, clarifications. I would argue nothing substantial as far as like policy changes, but want to present these to you for questions and action. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Executive Director Quinn. Members of the council, as Quinn said, what we've seen is the work's been done. The office staff have compiled, thank you very much. Julie, Chris, for all your work. Any questions regarding any of the changes that are noted in red on the mission statement and goals? No changes within the mission statement. Questions, clarifications? If not, I would accept the motion to that.
I move to approve the mission and goals as presented.
Thank you, Ann. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the mission and goals for 2022-23 as are shown with changes in red in our packet. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. Those in favor say aye. Oh, sorry, public comment. Anyone online? Thank you, Director. Seeing no public comment, we'll move to an immediate vote. Those in favor of said revision, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We have thus adopted the mission and goals statement on page 14 and 15 of your packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, we'll move to the bylaws on page 15. We did actually make quite a few changes to the bylaws, and a lot of it really was clarification and cleanup. And some of it was also alignment, some of the work that we did on the board of public ed bylaws, just to make things a little more streamlined. So I will actually go through a couple of these just really quickly. So under Article 2 Perfect, we just aligned this to like what your statutory duties are. So that is all listed here now, and taken straight from statute. We added the little
Seems weird.
thing in front of the statute, what?
It does seem weird. to me.
I know. Going through the motions.
I
okay?
know, I know.
It's actually, it's great.
Yeah.
Gets it where it might need to be.
Yep. Under meetings, we just kind of clarified some of the language in here, and some of the processes that, like, for meeting procedure, you guys had a lot of language in there about governing rules, and like the Board of Public Ed, we made it simple. We said you'll use Robert's rules as a guide, and go from there. So we took out all of that kind of unnecessary language. We did remove, the language under organization for officers around, the number of terms you can serve. I think you guys wanted to leave that open, for decisions yourselves. And that was it. Those are the substantial changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director Flynn, are there any questions regarding said changes? Can I ask just the silliest question ever?
Oh,
I am enthralled that you have just added the, what I will call the double S icon, which stands for that, what does that stand for?
I don't know. Our legal counsel told us we needed to use it.
When citing statute.
There we go.
It's from the statute.
The article symbol.
Mhm.
It is.
Yes, and I recognize it, I need to use it, this is exciting.
I never use it either.
I just learned something today, and thank you for that.
What's it called? Can we?
It's the subsection ASCII character set. Mhm. Are any other questions or discussion? I'm sorry for the lighthearted manner in which I'm looking.
Well, I did have a question, Chair. And Dickinson. We're moving from 2 to 4 appointed members on special meetings. Is there anything about that? It's on pretty screen. Special meeting.
Probably so if there's a forum.
Yeah, line 2. on
Yes,
discussion
Quorum
items.
of-
Yeah. Correct.
Thank you.
And that was just so like, if you remember, you guys had a special
didn't hate
meeting like
over
in November that year to review.
Mhm.
And that was to ensure like. Although it's a special meeting, you still need a quorum to act. And I think that was actually one of the recommendations made. We had a legal counsel review the board's bylaws, and that was one of the things that was changed, directly from theirs too.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
Process and happens. Special meeting, we had to act, but didn't actually act.
Yes. Good time.
All right, any other questions, comments? Make sure we accept the motion.
I move to approve the bylaws as presented.
Yep. Is there a second? Been seconded by Bruce. Thank you. Any discussion? Oh, no, sorry. Public comment. I was getting nervous about- Thought I was tripping myself up again. Thank you. I love having administrators on track. I need that at school too. This is awesome. Any public comment? Anyone online? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to a vote. Those in favor of said motion, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Unanimous. Thank you, people. Thus, we have amended our bylaws. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we come to Class 8 review. We've got 2 people to look at. Are you guys wanting a break? You want to keep going?
And Mr. Chair, you guys did have an email,
Chris,
Rick?
no, yeah.
that has links to these applications. You may want to open those. As Crystal gets on.
Good morning.
Well, good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. I love how you got A+.
Yeah. Blue is not my color, but we'll go with it.
It's okay. I think we got rid of A+ in the 80s, but I love how it just keeps coming back every time we get to see you guys in your office. It's awesome. All right, we've got some Class 8s to look at today.
Yes. So I apologize for not attending in person, but like McCall, we're literally supposed to be in 2 places at once with executive leadership happening in Helena today. So I'm going to bounce to that after I'm with you all this morning. And safe travels for all those. It's getting very gloomy looking here in Helena. So please be safe. So yes, today I'm here to provide information about 2 Class 8 dual credit post-secondary faculty licenses. These are action items where I request a recommendation for the Board of Public Education regarding the issuance of the license by the Superintendent of Public Instruction per ARM 1057 437-3. So I believe you should have the link and information. We'll start with Mr. Simpson.
One alphabetical.
Can we get, I'm sorry, Crystal, quick point of clarification. Can we get the last names of the people that are,
Yes.
Simpson,
So we see Simpson, but we don't see O'Brien, we see a farmer.
Farmer and
Yeah, there's no
Simpson.
Brian.
So you should have a folder.
I've Simpson and Farmer.
Our information for our packages.
Okay, On the agenda, Simpson was first. It doesn't matter which one we do first.
Okay,
Our agenda and our, it's just, it's a point of clarification. Our agenda states it's written for Mr. Patrick Simpson and Ms. Lisa O'Brien. But however, upon opening the materials, it appears it is for Mr. Patrick Simpson and Ms. Megan Farmer.
That is correct.
Okay, so Farmer and Simpson. Okay.
And if you go to the link that that same information is on the first sheet. And then there are 2 folders each for each applicant.
the email came from you, Chris?
Yes,
Yeah, there's a link.
Yep.
Oh, maybe it went to my school email. Hold on.
oh, it might have.
So Mr. Patrick Simpson and Miss Megan Farmer.
Thanks for your patience with us.
No worries.
Yeah, I was looking in the wrong email. I apologize.
I could have probably sent something wrong as well, so I'm not gonna put Chris on it. But those are the 2. Chair Elder, who would you like to begin with? It really doesn't matter to me.
Simpson, please.
Okay.
Madam Vice Chair.
So Mr. Patrick Simpson is applying for a Class 8 license with the endorsement in computer science. The transcripts provide evidence that Mr. Simpson has a degree in computer science from the University of California, San Diego. And he is currently employed at Great Falls College, MSU, where he is teaching computer science courses. So you should see typically on the first thing that I have is where it requests the endorsement through the Teach Montana application. However, that was not completed in his application. So for verification, I just asked him to send me an email stating what that is. And then when I go back into his application, I can fix it for him. But just wanted you to have the evidence as to what he actually is applying for. That is why I included that email. Then you'll see the employment verification from the university. And then most importantly, his resume and transcripts for you to review.
Thank you, Crystal.
Of course, take your time.
Okay. I don't know. Yep. Great. Okay.
About that. Got it.
Yeah, because now we have to go back out, there's a document. Right here. Their names.
Oh. Remember how we talked about institutional knowledge? I seem to be missing all of that this morning. I would entertain a motion if anyone's ready to make one. Or any clarifying questions before doing so?
Motion to approve the Class 8 application of Mr. Patrick Simpson for the endorsement area of computer science.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Teresa. Is there any discussion? No.
My only question is, do we know how long he's been at Great Falls University? I just didn't see that on his resume. I was just curious.
I'm maybe able to find it within his Teach Montana account if you have 2 seconds to hold on. The one good thing about me being virtual, right?
Very cool.
Yeah, I don't see that there either.
Okay. Hey, do you think the credentials are on his stand on his own without that knowledge?
Sure, I was just curious what he was teaching there and how long he's been there.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions, clarifications, comments? Okay, moving to a vote then. Those in favor of giving Mr. Patrick Simpson a Class 8 endorsement in computer science, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The Class 8 license will be issued to Mr. Patrick Simpson. Now turning to Miss Megan Farmer.
Yes, and I will, Chair Elder, say that I sent the Miss Lisa O'Brien to Chris. That was my mistake on the first one in the packet. And then I guess it was changed within the document in your Google Drive. So I will take that on. She will be your next meeting. So you have a preview of the name. She submitted the application after the agenda had already been made. So she'll be, obviously on the next docket for us. So I apologize, but we are on Miss Megan Farmer. She is applying for a Class 8 license with the endorsement in psychology. The transcripts provide evidence that Miss Farmer has a degree from the University of Great Falls, majoring in counseling, and she is currently currently employed at the Great Falls College MSU. And so on her transcripts, let me pull it up. Please let me know that you can read them clearly. They weren't very clear and I tried to rescan it. So if you need any clarification, please let me know.
It's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was.
Any questions, comments?
Well, the degrees in counseling, what is the difference of a counseling degree versus a psychology degree? I mean, obviously they're very closely related. I don't see very many psychology classes, more counseling.
Right.
So-
Psychotherapy class.
Yeah. So I guess I'm kind of confused. Maybe, Crystal, you can maybe answer that. I mean, because as a counselor, that's different than teaching psychology.
I actually had the same question. I would agree it's closely related. You wouldn't have a background in psychology, but typically when we look at major or minor, that's the first thing we look at in issuing a Class 8. The major is counseling, not psychology. So this is really to your discretion as to what to do with that. I'll just remind you that is the first thing we are to look at if they have a major or minor in the area of endorsement.
So I just noticed, actually on the resume that it states that she has a bachelor's in psychology from UVM, granted in 2010, yet we don't have those transcripts. So I think that's probably what's causing the problem for us. The master's is in counseling, but the bachelor's is in psychology and we're missing the set of transcripts for the bachelor's degree. So that's probably our issue. Do you have those available to drop into that folder?
I don't. These are the only things, everything that I have, you have.
So yeah,
Then maybe we should wait and get those and then, because it seems like
That's more right.
psychology and counseling are not
I,
the same. And so we would need more documentation on
I think
psychology.
if you take the resume at face value, it does say clearly bachelor of psychology, but I do think we want to stand on the foundation that it actually exists. So maybe Crystal, are you willing to bring this to us again and maybe reach out to her and get those transcripts?
Absolutely, Chair Elder. And, looking at her application, it doesn't have anything about degrees earned. So there was nothing for me to even go on to give that information to you. So my recommendation would be for me to reach out to her stating we need those transcripts in order to move forward, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And be fair, I understand her oversight. I just yesterday had to call the University of Montana and ask for my undergraduate degree because I don't seem to have proof of it. Pretty sure I got it before I got the master's.
Of course. Yeah.
So,
And that's, I maybe, I would agree. She would think that would be a given, but especially because that is the first thing we are to look at is the major minor. I absolutely understand and support that decision.
So a motion to table this application and consider it again at our April meeting.
I'll make a motion to table the class 8 application for Miss Megan Farmer until the next meeting.
Excellent. And OPI will reach out and obtain transcripts. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, move to a vote. Those in favor say aye. Public comment? Sorry, public? Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. There we go. So we'll consider Ms. Farmer next time. And thank you for your work, Crystal.
Thank you. And we will see you next month with Miss Lisa O'Brien and then an update on Miss Megan Farmer. Good to see you all.
Okay, good to see you. Thank you. Next, we're to item 4, which was to be item 5. We transposed those two. That's Christy Steinberg. Are we able to take a break? I know you've been waiting so
Oh, you're
patiently.
I got you blocked off.
Can we?
I'm here, I'm down. the hall.
Can we take a break? Yes, please. Thank you. I thought I was the only one that had something to drink this morning. Reconvene at 10:20. Is that okay? 10 minutes? Sorry, let's go 10:25.
Well, how far over the bathroom in place? Yeah.
Okay, 10:25. Well, see you then. Thank you. Online people, back at 10:25.
All campus.
I'd like to call this meeting back to order. Well, we have joining us today Christy Steinberg from the University of Montana. Thank you for coming. We're looking forward to hearing a bit more about Praxis. With Praxis 101.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Christy Steinberg, and I work as the Director of Accreditation here at the University of Montana. I've been the licensure manager at UM for almost 15 years now. I sometimes attempt to get rid of the licensure manager title, and that's how we've got a new person in that role, but I continue to serve in that capacity while we get that person trained. As Chair Elder mentioned, there's learning curves and institutional knowledge and historical knowledge that that makes some of those roles big. And so I'm here today kind of wearing both of those hats and have really been part of the Praxis adoption process almost since the beginning. So I did not do a PowerPoint for you today. I was refraining from that. So my colleague Jennifer Burns works as the licensure manager, our licensure official, I believe, is her exact title at NSU Billing. She and I met today to go over this Praxis 101 presentation for you. And as Executive Director Flynn said, she is under the weather, which is kind of hard to do outside here. So that shows how well she's not feeling today. So this kind of represents both of our information. You just get to hear my voice for this part of it. So I am a social studies teacher by training, so you're going to get just a little history lesson before I jump into the real nuts and bolts of what we do. So to give you an idea, we'll talk a little bit about the process, when and why tests are reviewed, how the panels are selected to review these tests, and then what actually happens at a review session. And then ultimately, what are the roles of the educator preparation programs, the EPPs in this process, and then the role of OPI, the Board of Public Ed and CSPAC. So that would be my little notes going through here today. Please feel free to stop me at any point in time and interject with questions. So I want to point out that the Praxis review process is an OPI initiated process. I'm here talking about it today because I have a lot of history with this, but this is an OPI process. OPI is the one who coordinates this and moves these forward. They are the ones who present this information to CSPAC and the board ultimately for approval. And really that goes back to No Child Left Behind. So many of you longtime educators here know that the way back. So really in 2004, the federal government told us we needed to require a test for our elementary educators. And we said no. And the Fed said yes, and we said no. And you know how this ultimately landed is that in 2004, they began the adoption process for a test for elementary, but that's where we came up with a multiple measure assessment. You've heard probably over time us talk about the math, the multiple measure assessment, where we look at the Praxis as one component. So in 2006, the elementary test came into play in Montana for new elementary graduates. And that preceded my time in the program, but it first came about as like, no harm, let's just have our elementary graduates take this, see how they do, we'll set a test, we'll determine that situation. So by 2006, this became a requirement for elementary educators. And the other thing that the federal government came under No Child Left Behind is said, what about these people with minors? You can't license people with minors. And we said, yes, we will. And they said, no, you won't. And so it really kind of came on to minors in core content areas following the same thing. By about 2013, we added all of our secondary license and K-12 licensure areas. So we added the music and the PE and all of that into effect. And again, when we first initiated all of those, it was take the test. We just want to see scores. And then it became, you have to reach a score on this test. So that arrangement really going back to 2006 was coordinated by the Office of Public Instruction. EPPs were involved, K-12 educators were involved. Again, that predates my time, but that's about when that happened. And then we maintained that same model going through. And when I started in 2008, I really was around when all of those minors came on board and all of the secondary and K-12 content areas came on board. I think one of the reasons why the EPPs have been so involved is because it's a lot of our graduates who were taking these to be licensed. And so that became part of it along with the teachers in these content areas. So that's how we landed on having the tests. And here we are today with reviewing tests. So the question comes up about when and why we review the tests. Well, first of all, it was that initial adoption phase when we looked at the test. And that was a very intensive look at, are these tests applicable to Montana educators or not? And now what happens is we also get into these revised or regenerated tests. So in other words, ETS, Educational Testing Services, revises their tests. They're not indefinitely out there. They have them on a schedule that kind of varies, that aligns with, their new content standards in math. Therefore, we should have a new math test. Or we haven't looked at this school library test for a while. They will review that at the ETS level. So we're kind of use their timeline. Probably within the next year, there'll be a couple of new tests that Montana is going to be looking at. I believe Crystal will talk about that at some point. There will be an ESL test. Montana does not currently have ESL, and that will be an area that you can, it's always an area you get licensed in, but you also now can add that endorsement via testing. So therefore we need a test. So ESL and American Sign Language will both be coming up. So that'd be another example of new tests versus the regenerated or revised test. The other times where we look at tests are if we see a need in this state to look at the tests. So Spanish would be one example of that. Our candidates coming out of Montana programs weren't doing super great on the Spanish tests and really the world language test. We wanted to look at why not. So we brought in data, we brought in panelists, we brought in educators, and we looked at those tests again. And that was another example of when we looked at the test and decide, is this score still appropriate or not? So those kind of give you 3 indications of when we review these tests. So when it comes to a formal review, there's a panel created of P20 educators to look at these tests. And essentially how that goes out is that OPI sends out a call for nomination. And in your packet was the example of the most recent example that OPI set out for the tests we're going to discuss as our next agenda item, which are the regenerated tests in the sciences, library, and school counseling. And so OPI will send out this call for nominations seeking P20 educators. That typically they use their channels to get that information out. They also work with the educator preparation programs, the EPP. From the EPP perspective, we typically want someone sitting on this test. We're preparing candidates to take this. We require it of our graduates. And so we want to know what's on this test and are our programs adequately preparing them, not to take the test, but is there alignment between the tests themselves and what we're teaching. And then we've also gone to professional organizations to reach out within those areas. So like when we did the math last year, the state went to the Math Association and they got a bunch of teachers to participate that way as well. So that's generally how those calls for nominations go out. From the nominations, then OPI chooses the panel. And when they're choosing the panel, they're trying to balance making sure that there's EPP representation, P12 representation, but also geographic representation. Now, if I'm being honest with you, we rarely get situations where we have so many people that we have to turn them away. The panels, I believe OPI and ETS who coordinate the reviews tend to keep those somewhere in the 6 to 12 range so that it's still manageable to hold conversation. Crystal may be listening in on us. So I believe when we got to the library this last go around, we had a lot of people wanting to participate in the library, but we had to have a limited amount. So I know when Crystal looked at that, she did balance between having the 3 programs in the state that run libraries, so MSU, UM, and UM Western, along with P12 librarians representing big schools, small schools, rural districts, urban districts, and tried to get a diverse geographic representation as well as experience background to that. Typically, the funding for serving on the panel has come from OPI. There have been more limitations on that funding as of recently than in the past. They used to pay for subs and things like that. They were paying for some stipends for travel and things like that, but there's limited funding available to participate in those panels, but there is something behind that. Questions before I
I noticed it said hybrid, so a lot of them may be zoomed in rather than doing
Yep.
travel since they're limited funds.
Yep, so that'll be I'll talk about the next step will be about how we actually run those panels. If they're, I can move right into Teresa's question. So the panel review itself has really taken on two different forms over time. This last go around, we did both a Zoom option and an in-person option for those test reviews. Sometimes in the past, these earlier years before Zoom was Zoom. And in our vocabulary that much, we tended to do in-person reviews. And when we do in-person reviews, there's actually a live test, an active current test that is reviewed by the panelists. When we do the remote or the virtual options, those are using the interactive practice test rather than a live test. They're parallel testing systems, but it's not a live test because there's much less security that goes into that. So we've done both of those. We've done hybrids. Mostly they've been virtual lately. This last round had a combination. People could come to Helena or could join in remotely for those tests. So after the panelists are selected and we assemble to meet, it's about a 2.5 hour meeting that's facilitated by ETS. So Education Testing Services is the one who administers the praxis test. We have a client relations director who spoke to you back in April, Nick Bellick, and he comes in and organizes those tests. His colleague Jason also helps sometimes with that, the most recent test review. So essentially ETS will come in and coordinate and facilitate really these presentations. So it starts with an introduction so everybody knows who's everybody on the panel. They go into a history of ETS, a history of the praxis. So very similar to what you would have all heard in the April review. They talk about the purpose of these tests being to assess the minimum knowledge that a new to the profession teacher should have. And that really becomes a critical function of that. They discuss how the questions are developed, how the questions are weighted, so that everyone on the panel has an understanding of the test process itself. And then they do an overview, a test at a glance, and then they talk about the Montana history and purpose. So much like I just talked to you about at the beginning, this is what we're doing. This is how this plays in for educator licensure, for new licenses, for added endorsements. Was a new process as of May of this year. So they talk a little bit about that, just so everyone sets the stage the same. At that point, everyone's had the chance to review the test. That's either if we're all meeting in person, it's a live test. Otherwise, if it's in the distance or remote and you've done an interactive practice test, you've been given that in advance so that you can go through the test on your own time, look through all the questions, see what you think about the test, see how you think you might have done on the test. And then they come back and decide if the test seems appropriate for Montana educators. And at that point, that's really when the conversations start to happen. There'll be conversations about this specific test question is horrible, I hate it. And then there'll be questions about, well, I thought this was too hard, I thought this was too easy. And then we have to take them back so that they understand how questions are weighted and chosen, and that there are some questions that don't factor in that are ETS is testing the question. So there's lots of conversations about that. And after we've kind of discussed, is this appropriate for Montana educators, the panel shifts to a discussion about recommended scores. And so ETS has a score that their national standard setting study, who's done kind of what I'm talking to you about now, but in a much more detailed way, they come out with a recommended score. And so ETS hands that information out to the panelists and also then shows them pass rates. If we set this for how many people who have taken it, this is what the pass rate would be. If we move one standard error measure one way or another, this is what the pass rate would be. And they start to show them data on anyone who's taken the test to date. They'll also show scores for any Montana specific test takers who may have taken this. Now with a regenerated test, we don't have people who have taken it yet. So that we're kind of looking at a small scale of national data on that. But if it's something like Spanish where we want to revisit it, then we can see how Montana performance has looked versus national performance. So they really provide us any data that they have at that point. They also share neighboring states. I know the Board of Public Ed asked us the last time, like, do you look at other states? And yes, we do. So the panelists are given the opportunity to look at any tests that have been approved by any states in the country, how many other states have approved it, and then we look at any neighboring states. So typically the panel will look at, well, what's North Dakota doing? What's Idaho doing? You know, looking around at some of those things. And then ultimately, after that conversation, a member of the panel suggests a score, tosses one out. There's a conversation about what do we think about that score or not think about that score. And ultimately, someone makes a motion. They try and reach consensus. Someone makes a motion and there is a vote within that panel. So that's about the 2.5 hour, what the meeting itself actually looks like within that group.
If there's a tie within the group or if it's not unanimous, how's it decided?
That will be discussed later with library, because that's what actually happened.
With a 5-5 vote, but there's still a recommendation. So
There's still a recommendation coming forward, because those are kind of where these future steps play into that. I would say, like I said, I've done this a long time. I've looked at, I think I sat in as an observer on all of the tests, so I've seen them all. I would say the most controversial: library, math, and world languages are the ones that tend to not be quite as unanimous as some of the other. And we can get into the library now, or when Crystal pops back on and we present the recommendations to you from a different group, a different hat that I'll wear in a minute. Pretty much there's been consensus reached, and if there hasn't been, a compromise typically has been, let's look at the scores in 2 years. Right, like, let's get some data, let's look at the scores and see, are we putting people into classrooms that maybe are not prepared to be in classrooms, or are we keeping people out of classrooms that we believe are actually effective teachers within classrooms? So that's been the compromise, is let's come back and look at these scores. Other questions about kind of that panel meeting and what that looks like?
Why is, with school counselors, why do U of M and MSU, I mean, how does that work?
So school counseling was never adopted by the state as requiring a test, but the programs at MSU Northern and MSU Billings that are not nationally accredited by K-Prep wanted that data point. And so it was decided that we should come up with a score for the state so that there's a common one. But there's so many assessments that go into the K-Prep accredited programs at UM and MSU that they didn't need that other data point. So once the panel makes their motion and votes on this, they are thanked for their time and they're excused. And this is where the EPPs become a little bit more involved in this process. So going back to 2014, so you'll notice between like 2006 and 2014, this process existed, and it was led by OPI, and also the EPPs participated that. But in 2014, we really saw a need, really for what Chair Elder was talking about before, that historical background, that kind of ongoing conversation, more voices. And so the Montana Council of Deans of Education created a working committee as part of their organization called the Praxis Working Committee, the PWC. And so the Praxis Working Committee came up about in 2014, really for the purpose of a communication mechanism between the OPI, the educator prep programs, and the Praxis organization, ETS. It was to review any kind of policy changes and how this would impact EPPs. It was to review test data and recalibrate scores if we felt that there was a need to do so. It was to determine participation on these multi-state standard setting studies. That's another long phrase, but ETS, when they review tests at the national level, they do national standard setting studies, and they'll put out calls to states for participants because they want to balance their participants too. So it was to determine participation in that. And that PWC was always coordinated by OPI. They called the meetings, they kept the minutes for the meetings, they recorded the minutes for the meetings. And then with the retirement of Linda Peterson from the OPI accreditation division, really the EPPs started coordinating the PWCs. Crystal participates in those meetings and is invited to those meetings, but that's coordinated at the EPP level, just with the shift that happened. And when I say coordinated, that would be me as the chair of the PWC. So again, that PWC then has OPI members to it, and it's all 10 EPPs in the state of Montana. So it's kind of like the deans have their jobs, which are very broad, and they don't necessarily deal with this all the time. So like CSPAC, and to the board, they created this group that's made up of members of all 10 of their teacher prep programs in the state. And so we all meet typically, I would say about 8 times a year to review scores, to do these reviews that we talked about, to have conversations like how are we supporting our students, which we call candidates, how are we supporting our candidates in taking tests, those types of things. Typically, the practice working committee members may or may not participate in panel reviews. So if the panel review is coming up for, say, special education, it may be like Trent, Professor Atkins, one of our special ed faculty, is a better representative than me with the accreditation and licensure hat on. So they're typically the EPP representation on panels tends to be the experts in the content area. So the panel reviews for counseling were our school counseling faculty, or our science education faculty, or our teacher librarian faculty. The members of the practice working committee can participate in observers. So when I say that I've been through all of these, that's pretty much as an observer in the process and seeing what happens so that I can provide support for our candidates, our students as well. So after the panel meets, then the PWC gets together. We talk about what happened in these panels. We've never gone against a panel recommendation with the PWC recommendation. We did, as Chair Elder said, end up with a situation in library where we split. And we did have to have a conversation about that and then make our recommendation. So again, because we're a body of the deans, and we take our recommendation to the deans. From there, the deans discuss it and kick their recommendation to OPI, and it's OPI who then reviews that and is bringing their recommendation from the Office of Public Instruction to the board and to CSPAC. So there's lots of eyes that look at it. You know, if you take the panel, which has actual educators in the specialty areas on that, then you've got the second body that works with praxis as a whole, and you can see the big picture praxis. And then we've got the deans who all their students who graduate from their programs are taking these tests, ultimately then to the board who has the authority to approve this process. So that's how it's been working since 2006. And that's where we are today, praxis.
Excellent.
Black for
I know. That makes a lot more sense now.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I looking back, we talked about like what's in the test, right? What are the test at a glance? What are the makeups? How are questions determined? But now we have the chance to see kind of where we land scores.
You're not just throwing them out.
And there's a lot that goes into, I think one of the things when we get into the next item on your agenda, when these panelists review these, even the score that they're given as a recommended score, there's a lot behind the scenes that I think ETS explained somewhat to you in terms of that national standard setting study, where their educators look at, is this a question everyone should absolutely know versus is this a harder question, and the questions everyone should know are weighted more heavily than others, and there's a lot of kind of metrics that go into determining that score as well before Montana ever looks at it.
It's funny, setting the test score is like with special ed, we went back and forth on It's like a pride thing. Oh, I want ours to have this. You know, and it's like, maybe that's not the best idea. It's kind of funny.
Mr. Chair, do you wanna, move on to the next item so you guys can actually talk about the most recent score?
The way they overlap,
Yeah,
um,
I'm gonna,
yes, and I'm actually, if you could you direct us to a spot where we can see what the scores currently
Right
are?
here.
I'm lost in OPI's website, not
So,
seeing it. We've looked at
If
it
you
before.
go, if you go to the first chapter,
Okay,
and then you click on the educator preparation page,
okay,
and then more practice information. And then you click on Montana content knowledge score ranges for private practice, subject.
Yeah, you can also, if you're talking about the ones that are being proposed today, that is in your packet.
Yeah,
If you're
Correct.
talking about all of the scores and tests that have been approved, it may be faster to go to the praxis page, which is ets.org/praxis.
So just
And you can select by state.
for the sake of saving everyone time, and they just research
the
the
digging. Mhm.
the qualifying scores for biology go from 151 to 154, which is up.
But completely different.
Different,
stats.
yeah.
So like we're comparing half of it on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, there was only, but I mean, all of them, it looked like, and the score range is from 100 to 200, is that correct?
Yeah, and that doesn't mean 200 questions and you get
Right.
1 point right. So that's a lot of getting the panelists to wrap their heads around the fact that, wait, this is only what percent out of 200 do we really want a D to count, but that's not really how it works with the weighting of the questions.
Okay,
could you clarify, I'm looking at the document that Hannah referred us to, where there's a score range and then the points.
Okay.
What's there's some kind of conversion there?
So prior to the most recent rule changes in chapter 57,
Okay,
everyone was required to take the praxis to be licensed in Montana. And Montana EPPs were using that multiple measure on that page.
oh, okay,
When rule changed, praxis is one option that new to the state people can take. Our EPPs are still utilizing that multiple measure.
okay,
Um,
you're in
so in
transition. Yeah,
Those points, though, I think,
yeah,
a 3 was you need to exceed the Montana score, 2 was 90% of the Montana
Okay.
score, 1 was at least 80% of Montana score, 0 was below 80%.
Okay.
of Qualifying.
okay,
yeah. So the idea was that a test is a test on one day, right?
right,
And we have multiple measures, and that system that you're looking at goes back to that 2004
okay,
window of time. So yeah, that's a translation between the passing score that we're talking about
Yes.
today.
and the multiple measures. Thank you for clarifying.
Any other questions?
In regards to the general finance, I guess, there was a plan to evaluate the score in 2 years. I realize that the score can't be compared exactly, of course, but the qualifying score was dropped significantly. Was that a concern that they felt like that might be too low, or what was the concern and why did it need to be evaluated?
The concern was that might be too low.
Okay,
Is the test too easy that people who don't have what we would see as minimum skills, especially when you're talking under broad field, you can teach physics, you can teach chemistry.
Right.
You can teach all of those things, and the question was, you can take that one test to be able to teach physics.
Right.
Are there enough questions on that these individuals that actually do have that background?
right.
Just council members, for that question came off of the next section there, I believe, the next. Yeah, that was an item 4, which we're using as item 5, so officially, let's transition to that. And get an introduction here before we go with questions, okay?
right, and then, after you guys do ask whatever questions you have, we will make a recommendation to the board. It'll go along with the recommendation that was made, that you see here. So the board will get that for their meeting and take action in March.
So we have a review of the exam scores and the recommendation that'll come. And I've got, Christy and Crystal on that as well. Do you want to, oh, welcome back. Do you guys want to present on this as well then?
Sure, I'm gonna toss that to Crystal to get us going.
Coming your way, Crystal, is that okay?
Sounds great. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Christy. So she is the guru of praxis. And now I'm hearing I'm actually supposed to be in charge of the praxis working committee at this point. So we can chat about that, Christy, but I love that you have that background and expertise and you have been my mentor. So love to just kind of keep it as it is for now, at least. So we are excuse me, in the process of reviewing, I believe, 7 exams. And in your packet, let me see, starting on page 24, 25. You'll see in the executive summary, those tests listed there. The reason for the review, as it states, the tests that are the current tests will no longer be available after August of this year. So we need to look at the new tests. And as Christy explained so well, we had a panel for each test. It then went to the Praxis Working Committee, then to the Council of Deans. We presented to the Board of Public Ed just as an informational item last month. And now we are here with you for your recommendation. So I think the best thing to do is, well, we can look at the timeline, which would be the next page of your packet. And we are towards the end of our fall testing timeline. So we're asking for your recommendation and then hope to bring it to the board in March for theirs, and so that it can be adopted. The next page is the Montana Council of Deans recommendations. I will say that these recommendations were the recommendations of the Praxis Working Committee as well. And you will note that the comments on some of the tests that would like to be revisited, like school librarian, are also listed in these recommendations. So they honored the panel's recommendations in terms of at least letting their split vote, be heard and be seen. So if you want to go to page 28, and we can talk about each of the different content areas and have questions, as we go out. Please just, after each test, we'll kind of just pause. And Christy, please chime in. You, like I said, you've done this how many times, and I've only done it now twice. So if you have anything to add, please do. So the first test that we looked at was biology. The Council of Deans unanimously recommended the use of the new 5236 biology praxis test with the score of 158, which was the recommended score by ETS for educator licensure purposes in Montana. Christy, go ahead.
Score of 154.
That's what it says in our
What did I say?
158.
Oh boy, 154. I did that at the board also. I as I approach
5236 146.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah 5236 with a score of 154. I apologize.
No worries.
So, I have notes, I have kind of, information about participants for any of these panels that happen. So, we have representation to give you an idea from teachers from Belgrade, Wolf Point, Hobson, Kyla, who used to be a high school physics teacher, so we had good representation from teachers, even though our numbers on some of these were small. I think looking back, I think we need to think about what time of day we offer these, when we do these, especially if we're doing them remote now. Because that was getting to be more challenging, especially when school districts don't have subs. That was a lot of what we heard. It's like, I'd like to participate, but not have subs. But everyone who was there had done the test, was engaged in the conversation. Alpine had County High School was another one, had been involved in the conversation, and reviewed the test and actively participated. So I do have more notes if you have questions on it.
So just conceptually, before we get into all of these individual tasks, when you're recalibrating the scores, are you looking for a target range for passing percentage? I mean, are you saying ideally we have this amount of people that are passing, and you think that's a healthy rate that those people are successful? What is going into that conversation to determine the score? Being as no one has seen this test before, it's an impact.
So there's a lot of trust put into those national processes that ETS does to determine. So we don't really have, I mean, they did present pass rates on the legacy tests to us. Right. They presented pass rates to us on the current test, but the ends were so small. We did this in October, that test became live in September. And so that's part of the issue with new tests, is that you have the work that they've done. And the pass rates vary by test fairly significantly, even in Montana. The math pass rate's lower than, say, the special ed pass rate, for example. So we don't necessarily try and target, we want the pass rate to be 70%, because the idea is the score determines the minimum, do no harm knowledge that one needs to have as a legal professional teacher. So I know I sound like a broken record when I'm saying that, but we don't necessarily look at it in that way. When we trigger reviews again for tests that we currently offer, like the Spanish test, we do look at those pass rates and we say, why is our pass rate for Spanish so low? So we look at it more in relation to that, and in the performance of candidates at like my program, more than do we want the pass rate to be 70% or 80%? We don't really look at it in that way. Now, math and science people definitely talk about those things. I don't know if that answered your question.
That's helpful, thank you.
So Christy, when everybody meets, and maybe I missed this in your 101 overview, they've taken the test before.
They've taken the test. They haven't gotten their score on that.
Okay.
The practice tests are not scored in that way. So oftentimes they'll be like, well, I missed 20 questions. And some of these people are fairly like, I'm a PhD in chemistry. I don't want to miss 20 questions. Right. But then, so then the conversation has to come up about how these questions are weighted and why there are harder questions and easier questions within that. So that sparks that conversation. Okay. So everyone has taken the test.
Yep.
And even those interactive practice tests have actual test questions on them, but they don't get a score.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and because when we start to talk about how raw points equate to a score, they start to feel a little more comfortable that they probably would have passed.
So the next test we looked at was the general science, Broadfield science. And let's make sure I get the numbers right. So the Montana Council of Deans unanimously recommended the use of this test 5436 with a score of 141 for educator licensure purposes in Montana. And this was one of the tests that the panel asked that we reevaluate the score in 2 years, autumn of 2024, as data is available. And as Christy stated in her 101, these are new tests that are being used. So the state itself doesn't have any data to support, where the scores lie, but also sort of nationwide, there's very minimum data points to know if the score is, reasonable, not reasonable. And the reason for us to wait for a year is because this test won't go into play until, call it September of this year. So that would give time for those to take the test and to revisit, the score next fall.
I think one of the concerns about this, like you mentioned, 141 seems pretty low. And I think that that was their concern, considering that you could teach all of this. And then the second consideration that the panel really cannot ignore is that it used to be you were taking the test because you had the college background in it, and now you can take the test and that's the only thing that you had. So those conversations did happen. Someone tossed out a higher score, but we don't really have data to justify a higher score at this point. And I think that was the counter to that, is that what are you going to set as a higher score? And that's more arbitrary than the work that went into setting the recommended score. So ultimately, that group of 6 did decide with consensus to set it at 141, but let's look at it again. 2 years down the road, as Crystal pointed out, this hasn't been approved, so our folks aren't taking it yet. And so let's get us through a little bit before these groups review the score again.
When I was curious too, if there was kind of some thought behind encouraging science-minded people to take the broad field instead of the other biology, earth, space, or chemistry, and give them more flexibility when they can teach, but those scores are significantly higher. Again, I understand it's not apples to apples there, but I certainly think when I'm hiring people, I would prefer someone that has the general science broad field endorsement, just because that gives me flexibility in what class they can teach. So it does make sense to me that that would be somewhat lower for that reason.
So our Earth and Space Science panel was very small. Christy, 2 folks, I think, from an EPP, if I remember correctly. The Montana Council of Deans unanimously recommended the use of the test 5572 with a score of 154 for educator licensure purposes in Montana.
And the numbers of participants, that's a reflection of, like you said, we have a lot more people teaching broad field in the state than we do.
And I think, and with that, that's why the participation was limited, and we appreciated having participation from the EPPs, but that is a pretty specific area, and we did not have representation from school districts. For chemistry, the test 5246 was recommended unanimously with a score of 146 for educator licensure purposes. Christy, could you remind me who was involved in that panel?
That was 1 EPP and
Two.
one K-12 teacher, yes, who teaches chemistry.
And physics was the test will be 5266 with a score of 145, and it was unanimously recommended from the Praxis Working Committee and the Montana Council of Deans. And I believe this was a unanimous. There was 3 people, I think.
2 on physics.
Two in physics also. Okay.
What's interesting was with the science, it's a good opportunity, as we were talking earlier, you all were discussing professional development opportunity. It's a good conversation for them all to come together too and look at, what they're teaching in their classrooms, and is this applicable? The concern always with these tests are it's content, not pedagogy. It is. It's a content test. It's not a pedagogy test. We measure pedagogy in lots of other ways that if you listen to any of our accreditation stuff, how we do all of that. But it is a content test, and that is a weakness of the test. But that's always a conversation among the family.
And for school counselor, I did hear Christy share that the test is not a requirement at the state level, but we do offer it for the universities that use it for data purposes. So the new test is 5422. And it was unanimously recommended with a score of 159 for educator licensure purposes in Montana. So technically the test is not a requirement. We don't, need that score at the OPI, but the test is for the actual accredited programs at U of M and MSU.
And that score, just so that you know, is something that ASCA is using, which is the Association of School Counselors. That score aligns with what the ASCA recommended score was, so they felt comfortable for that. If any of their graduates went to other places, that they would have that national organization score within there as well. There were conversations in this group about, well, this is what should happen. Some of these questions don't always reflect what actually happens in the field, right? It's best practices, but so that was the point of that conversation. So I just kind of want to give you guys that. I want to talk too much, but I want to give you a scope of the richness of conversations that happen.
And last but not least is our school librarian. A little backstory, as Christy was saying, I was the person, obviously to do the outreach for these panels, and we had an overwhelming amount. I believe 23 people wanting to participate in the panel for a school librarian, which is wonderful. The way that I went through, I looked at who turned them in first, but also then, as Christy shared, I wanted really to have somebody, that put down that they teach at the elementary level, middle school level, high school, the media specialist, just a variety, so that when looking at the test, they would really be able to give input on those different areas. We did have a little bit of an issue with this test in terms of the panel most of everybody was on site. Actually, excuse me, it was about split, I guess, but we had several on site. And we noticed that the wrong test was given to the participants. It was the current test, excuse me. Christy, can you continue?
So when ETS requested our folks that they get the interactive practice test, because they all have individual codes, that got picked out as the old test. And so they all took the test and they're like, there are really a lot of outdated questions on here. And we're like, oh. So we had to pivot, gave them all, got the new version of the test, pivoted, allowed them some time to actually review the revised test that we're supposed to be evaluating. The upside to that was they got to see the old version and the new version. And they got to say, wow, this is an improvement. The terminology on this, the scenarios that they're using, the information that they're asking, it's a better test. So that was the upside once we got through some of the annoyance and frustration with the scenario.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So we had after they did review the new test, that we had a very long conversation on the score. It ended up, and you have the number, Christy, I believe in front of you, that the recommendation was not unanimous from the panel, but that overall the majority went with the 154, which was what the ETS recommended for licensure purposes. But like with the general science, to evaluate in 2 years, autumn 24, as the data is available.
And was the concern on this one that it was too high?
No, too low.
And I think I can speak for, I took some notes, and we had lots of conversations about this. I think one of the pushes for the hire was to really discussion of the rigor and raising the status of the profession, especially with changes that went through in 57 that allows one to become a school librarian by taking the test. So they said, if this is the only thing they're doing, the bar should be higher. So that was kind of that one side of the argument is, let's look at the rigor, let's look at, maintaining and improving the status of the profession. But the reality of it is that On the other side, we don't have any data to justify that we're putting people into the field that aren't qualified to be in the field. And I will say that to sit in a room with these 10 individuals who were split 5 to 5, fully disagreeing, and the civility of their conversation was so impressive. Right? You're sitting next to this colleague who you work with or don't work with, who does your same job, and they had great conversations, very respectful conversations with one another. And we got to the point where, people said, well, if they're willing to study and prepare that much that they could actually pass this test, then that is showing their dedication to the profession. And so, maybe it's about how we mentor people and bring people into our fold, and we want school librarians, because at the same time this conversation was happening, ratios in chapter 55 were on the table. And so there was a really robust, we were joking about how many times can we use the word robust lately, conversation about this topic. And ultimately, we felt that we were reaching the end of this window. I think we extended it by a half an hour because we needed more testing time. And we felt like if someone moved, it was going to be because they felt pressured to move and not because they actually changed their opinion on it. And so we said, let's take it forward to these other groups are going to look at it and ultimately weigh in on what happens. And so when it came to the Praxis Working Committee, we had a long conversation about this particular test. Same sort of, here's the political situation, here's the situation, here's the test score, here's the rigor conversation. And ultimately, that group and the deans both decided that we don't have data to support some random higher score. We don't know what a standard error of measure is yet. We don't know what the percentage of passing rates look like when people take this. And ultimately wanted to acknowledge the work of the panel and that they were split, but we had to make a recommendation. And so both of those groups, the PwC and the MCDE, the Dean's group, went ahead with the national ETS recommended score of the 154 for those reasons. Again, with that, let's look at it in 2 years and see what performance looks like.
And it's obvious because the discussion was, is the score too low?
Yes.
We're not looking at educators not being in the classrooms because of this decision. Any questions? Comments?
I think a lot of work has gone into it. It wasn't just random, so I feel confident. we can do something about it.
Thanks for your morning, both of you. Crystal, thanks for double presenting.
Always, yes. No, it's nice to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Tracy. Any recommendations we'd like to make in the form of a motion, please?
I move to recommend the Board of Public Education approve the recommended Praxis exam scores as presented.
For a second,
I'll second.
it's been moved and seconded. Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Kate. Any discussion?
I'd like to know what you put on it, the review from the test.
Any other discussion, comments, questions? Any public comment? Seeing one, we'll vote on the motion on the floor to recommend all Praxis test recommended test scores. We recommend that the Board of Public Education do pass as has been recommended by PwC and the deans. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Excellent. Thank you, people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a note before we move on? If we do have 2 agenda items before the panel discussion about the teacher residency. I will let you know that we have the teacher residency scheduled for 11:30. Maybe we can push that back to 15 minutes and try to get through these other two, quickly, unless you think that you want to spend more time on them. But these were two areas that you had requested, so I don't want to rush us through if you want to spend more time. But I do know that we have folks who are joining us, who had time at 11:30. So I'm just wondering what your pleasure is, how you want to approach this. It has stopped snowing, so that's a good thing. It's like, for a moment, yeah.
Jay is in the lanes.
Both Jay and Wendy Bonds are on, so I don't know what else they're balancing, so I don't want to push them off too much either.
Okay. What I'm taking away from this, Madam Executive Director, is that we want to have item 8 at promptly 11:30.
Or I could message them about 11:45, if we think we could do 25 minutes for the next two items. I think the ESER won't take too long, it's just presenting where we're at and answering questions you might have. The critical quality educator shortage area reports, may take a little bit more time, just given that that's an area that you guys are interested in.
Certainly amenable to that.
Do our best.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right.
11:45 is our goal.
Perfect. I will promote Jay and Philip now.
Thank you. Once again, that doesn't do it. Yeah.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, for the record, Jay Phillips, that's PHI-LLIPS, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer with the Office of Public Instruction. Appreciate the council's invite today to come and talk a little bit about the critical quality shortage report. So I'll go ahead and jump in unless, Mr. Chair, you have something else you want to start with initially?
Hey, sir. Excellent. Good to have you. I'm glad you didn't have to drive on the roads to get here. Fantastic.
Yeah, we appreciate the flexibility in that. That's great. So, all right. So I'll go ahead and get started. And so looking at your guys' board packet, it looks like this starts on page 33. Order is just a little bit reversed, but I'm okay with that. I'll just start with this first one. And this is the reported categories by school year. This is a report that actually I put together for the Board of Public Education. This is nothing that's required in statute, but the critical quality report, you've seen that there's quite a bit of data. And so really to try to disseminate that, trying to make it in a little bit better presentation. So what I put together is that in that first box there, you see under reported categories by school year. Really what that does, it takes the categories that are listed in that critical quality shortage report and just outlines the 4 primary ones. And that's the emergency authorization, student recruitment pool, the not filled by recruitment, and then the provisional license. And I put in comparative data to what was reported last school year, which is the 21-22 school year. And then of course the current year, which is the 22-23. If you take a look at that total all in that far right-hand column, you can see that from the 21-22 school year of 29-19, that there actually was a reduction as reported in the 22-23 down to 2,700. Now, I will say with that, you know, although there is a reduction of a little over 200, that's not an indication that school districts are having better results with their recruitment retention. Again, you got to remember, part of this is actual report that comes from the school districts, and so they can actually elect to be part of the collection process, or they don't have to. One of the primary incentives for them, of course, is they've got a lot of school districts out there that are school teachers, I'm sorry, that are trying to qualify for the Quality Educator Loan Assistance Program, which this report is the primary driver for part of determining their eligibility for that program. So schools do have an incentive from that respect to report this. What I put together next under that reported categories by recruitment level, I broke that out by the elementary, high school, middle grades, and then system. System means that there are certain schools that can report. They don't have to do it by each of the, of course, if you know, within a system, there can be a high school and elementary. They just decided to report that as a collective, and so they just reported all of it. Again, as we indicated before, that you can see there is a reduction in like elementary, high school, middle grades, but for the system, there was a slight increase in that area there. Okay. So, Mr. Chair, before I go on to the next page, if the council has questions on that section, I'm happy to entertain questions.
Excellent introduction, sir. Any questions?
Mr. Phillips, I have a question. Could you explain the few in recruitment pool, kind of what that, I understand the emergency authorization, and then not filled by recruitment, just elaborate on the meaning of those categories?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So if you guys can jump to page 41 of your packet. This is part of the critical quality shortage report itself, and this actually identifies and defines each one of those categories that we have listed, right? So, so those ones that are like few in a few in recruitment pool would be like fewer than 5 candidates that remain vacant for 30 days. So that, you know, again, of course, we collect that information directly from the schools and have a recruiting quality educators of the teams collection that typically is open from September through November. You know, again, prior to the teams opening this year, the OPI revised the data input screen to specifically match the wording in the statute. But again, like OPI believes that the wording used in the teams collection for prior 2 years is close enough to map these results to a new statutory definitions for this initial year. I do want to also note that I was going to address earlier that the part of the definitions of quality educator, and then like the requirement for school districts or for OPI to report this to Board of Public Education. There's a Senate Bill 70 that's currently made it through its second reading with amendment, but they're actually looking to remove the requirement of the reporting of the critical quality shortage areas, and then also for that quality educator loan assistance program, removing that as one of the eligibility requirements itself. And so then, council member, did that answer your question? Is this sufficient to answer your question, or do you want me to go a little bit more in detail?
That answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I'm going to jump back real quick then up to, well, my apologies. Were there other questions from the council on that first page, on that page 33?
Negative, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump down to page 34. And what this does is in that critical quality report, shortage report, you'll see that there's each one of the actual endorsement areas. And so in that first column in that left-hand side under school, I'm sorry, that's the school year. It's actually, though, that's the endorsement areas where the school districts have actually reported that shortage. And so like that first under agriculture, you can see there's only 21 and 22 data. And the reason why that is we didn't have anybody report anything for 22, 23, which is a little bit odd because, I mean, to have that significant of a reduction in agriculture could be the case. But again, part of that could be, again, that 200 reduction. That's one of those areas where we saw that reduction itself. And then again, for like a comparison under art, you can see the 21, 22 total, they reported 80, but 22, 23, there was an actual reduction down to 55. And so if the council wants to, you can utilize this as a resource to go in there. If there's certain like endorsement areas that you're interested in, then you can actually identify those in this report here. So Mr. Chair, I won't go into more detail with that, but again, I'll open up to the council questions if they have anything on that section.
Thank you, sir. Council members, any questions on the reported categories by type section?
Chair Elder, I have a question. I'm looking at library, of course, and usually the number goes down, like for filled with recruitment, but the number actually more than the few did. Is that based on the definition of maybe these jobs came open at last minute or something like that, and that's why they weren't filled?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, yeah, so there's a couple different factors. Of course, like you said, it's really what the school districts reported, but there is also some timing factors in this as well. If you've heard from any of your local districts that there are having issues, and we'll use library as the example, with their recruitment. Again, the report itself is only, and the data is only as solid as what people report to us. And so in some of those areas, like you said, you can see those reductions. But again, the indication that I get from the field is that they're still having challenges. Now, part of the process is that in the event that they did actually miss the reporting deadline, school districts do have the opportunity to submit like an emergency designation of a critical shortage area. And so there's portions of those that we receive that this data doesn't reflect. And so some of that could be that there was actual other identified needs that didn't meet that actual timing of the reported data. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chair Elder, I have another question. Is there, does OPI have any idea what drove the decline in the shortage in the 200? Or does anybody have thoughts about that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, council member, like I personally don't have that information, but I mean, that's something we could probably dive into and see if there's, I'm not sure if in our tow and our team's reporting, if they indicate anything else outside of just the critical areas, but that's something I could absolutely look into and get back to council.
I know in our regional superintendents meetings, we had a discussion about this data and that, and it we really felt the time in COVID. That there was a kind of mass retirement in the COVID years, and we were coming out of that somewhat. So we
So
were
are people coming back to work?
not entirely
retired or-
that so much as we just didn't have as many positions to fill.
We didn't have.
So you might have 6 people retire, the previous year and only 3 the next year.
Yeah.
And that kind of usually that was a trend that we saw. So I would submit that that's what I believe is driving that difference.
Is there just fewer FTE
Right,
openings?
correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, if there's no other questions, then I'll go ahead and I can start with the actual critical quality report, and that starts on page 38 of your packet.
Excellent, thank you.
And so jumping down to page 39, this just really gives a little bit of background, definitions of under 24503 MCA, kind of the responsibilities of the Board of Public Education, and then also like that it's based on the reporting of impacted schools or school districts, of course, and then per the 20-4502 outlines the actual criteria for the critical quality educator shortage areas. Does have definitions around what a quality educator is, which again is a full-time equivalent educator who holds a valid educator license or is licensed professional providing services to students in a public school district, an education cooperative, the Montana School Deaf and Blind, Montana Youth Challenge, or of course a state youth correctional facility. The next portion of that there, I had spoke to earlier about the Quality Educator Loan Assistance Program. So this just gives a little bit of historical perspective. You know, back in fiscal year 2028 through 2017, OCHI was actually the one that administered the program, which starting in 2008 when it first started, you can see that they actually awarded out a little over $300,000. And then at the end of the program in 2017, they were just shy of the $460,000 for distributions towards recipients of the program. In 2019, the legislature did make a decision not to actually fund it for the 18 and 19 biennium. And so for that year, we didn't have any data. And then in that 19 session under House Bill 211, they actually transitioned the program over to OPI. We received a line item House Bill 2 appropriation of $500,000 for each part of the year. The first couple of part of the years, the first two, 20 and 21, we spent just a little bit over half of our appropriation. You can see there in 21 that it was around $271,000. Last year was kind of unusual. We actually saw a pretty big uptick and we almost expended all of the appropriation. So we distributed out about $453,000. And those funds this year, where the payments don't actually go to the teacher itself, the qualifying teacher, we actually make direct payments to their loan servicing organization. And so that way we're sure that that funding goes to the appropriate place. And then we actually have our own documentation that we made that payment and it was received on behalf of that teacher. And I do want to note again, so that under that Senate Bill 70, the proposal has two things. One, again, under the current program, there's a couple things that they have to be eligible. First of all, they have to be working in an impacted school. And then second, they have to be endorsed in the critical shortage area that is in the report itself. And so, for example, if we have a student, a critical shortage area of science, but you have a newly hired teacher that has an endorsement in math, they actually weren't eligible for that program. And so typically we had, around 150 applicants, which we denied around anywhere from about 15 to 20 because they weren't properly endorsed for the program. Senator O'Brien, kind of in conversation with her, saw this as kind of a hang up in the program and wanted to make sure that more teachers were eligible for the program. And so they're trying to get rid of that, the eligibility requirement of the critical quality shortage area itself. And so again, it's made it through second reading. So we're hoping that will go through. If that does open up, our first year in fiscal year 24, we're anticipating about another $1 million in distributions outside of the 500,000 that we currently have. And so we anticipate about a 10% that year of the program. So funding is still contingent on legislative passage, and so we're not quite sure if they'll bring us up to the appropriation level of that, like 1.5 million. They may choose to keep it at that 500,000, which if that becomes the case, then under current law, we would have to prorate the amount that we actually do for the distribution, so we don't exceed that appropriation of $500,000. So, and so you're aware under the current program, the way it works is that a teacher in their first year can receive up to $3,000. Second year, they can receive up to $4,000, and their third year, they can receive up to $5,000. So if they're part of the program for that first 3 years, then they stand to have $12,000 of their student loan debt released. There is also an option for the local school district where they're teaching at. If they choose to participate, they can have a fourth year eligibility in which the school can provide up to $5,000 towards loan assistance as well. So if they get all that funding, then the total would be around $17,000 that would go towards their loans.
Wow.
So, Mr. Chair, with that, I'll go ahead and pause there real quick, and then if the council has questions, I'd be happy to entertain those.
Mr. Phillips, that year 4 option, that was the school was paying for that one versus OPI?
Mr. Chair, that's absolutely right. Yeah, so the first 3 years of that $12,000 is state funded, and then that fourth year, again, that would be if the school district opted in to provide that up to $5,000 incentive.
Copy, thank you. Any other questions?
Oh.
Okay, so then I'll go ahead and continue. I'm going to go on to page 40, and this is the criteria for an impacted school. And so again, current statute under 24502 defines what an impacted school is. Of course, that's a special education cooperative, MSDB, the Montana Youth Challenge Program, a state youth correctional facility, a public school located on Indian reservation, and then a school district that's actually, I always find this kind of comical, driving at a reasonable speed for the road surface of located more than 20 miles in Montana. I wish this would have been applicable when we didn't have speeds in Montana, speeding caps in Montana, because I'm curious how far you could get, in 20 minutes with that. But so anyway, so that's a definition of the impacted schools. Down below it does give the criteria for a quality educator shortage area. Of course, that means a specific licensure or endorsement area in an impacted school in which in any of the 3 immediate preceding school fiscal years, a position was filled through the procedure set forth in 1927-32, 24-106, which is your class 5 provisional certificates, or 24-111, which is your emergency authorizations, filled from a candidate pool of less than 5 qualified candidates, then also advertised and remained vacant and unfilled due to a lack of qualified candidates for a period in excess of 30 days. Or the final one is a vacancy for a current school year was advertised for a period of at least 30 days, and the district received less than 5 applicants from the qualified candidates. And so that's kind of, again, that area that the school districts are currently having to report to us. Again, if under Senate Bill 70 that goes through, then this actual reporting requirement may no longer exist. So. And I'm not going to go too much in detail. I can let the committee read that. This is the section for the methodology for identifying quality educator shortage areas. Really, that's just how OPI utilized our current systems where we collect data and how we applied that to the report itself. And then starting on page 42 is the actual by individual system or school where those actual reported areas are. And again, those first pages that I went over does summarize these individually. The one thing I can, if the council's interested in it, we do have this in Excel. So if you ever wanted like a breakout of by school, the critical shortage areas that they reported, that's something that OPI would be more than happy to provide to the council. And so that, Mr. Chair, that's pretty much the report. And again, I'm happy to entertain any questions from the council.
Excellent, sir. Thank you. All right, council members, any questions?
Chair Elder, I have a question. My question is about the county number. How do you know what that is? Is that, it's obviously not license plate because I couldn't find it. So is that something that you come up with at OPI, or is that something, where can we find that?
Mr. Chair, council members, yeah, so that's actually, so if you see like 56, you would think that means Yellowstone County, but that's not the case. OPI does utilize, we have our own actual county convention. If you'd like a crosswalk, that's something we'd be happy to provide you.
Any other questions? Okay. Sir, thank you for the information. Looking at the overall picture from 30,000 feet, how comfortable are you with the situation? Are you losing sleep over things? How critical is our shortage?
Mr. Chair, council members, so I mean, the data does reflect, that there is obviously there's shortages within our state, personally, I'm not as involved with the program side of things, but I do, work with a lot of the school districts and their leaders. And this is something, a topic that does come up pretty regularly. Even though, like I said initially, that the initial counts or data reflects that there are reductions, it doesn't mean that our state and our districts are having, still being able to fill a large portion of their vacancies. And so I think we still got a lot of work to do. If you guys are following session, there are, a lot of good conversations. There's some bill proposals out there to kind of help with some of these situations. I'm hoping that with the passage of Senate Bill 70, that is a great recruitment tool that they can utilize for a new teacher coming in, as we know that, pay salaries for our teachers is always challenging compared to other states. And so having a $17,000, incentive, I think is a great recruitment tool. I do know that, and just again, conversation with the leaders, that they do advertise that pretty significantly when they're trying to do the recruitment. We even have a lot of teachers that will call before they've even finalized their teaching to see if they'd qualify under the program. And so, again, I hope that it helps out. But, personally, my goal is always as, a member of OPI and just as a member of our state is to help out our teachers as much as possible.
Excellent. Any other questions? Thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate it. Any other questions for Mr. Phillips? Thank you for the information.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of council, I appreciate again the invite to come in, and I'm happy to meet everybody for the first time, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Trying to check, guys, puts it just prior to 11:45.
I do see that one of our panelists is on and we're waiting for the other one. So let's do a quick ARP ESSER. I do see that Wendy Fons is on. So
Okay.
Wendy, if you could do it, I'm going to promote you and do a quick recap for us. Oh, you're muted, Wendy.
Good morning, Wendy.
Oh, can you hear me?
There we go.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Elder and members of the council. So my name is Wendy Fawns, WENDI-FAWNS, and I am the ESSER and EANS Director for the Office of Public Instruction. Good to meet all of you. I will just go over a high-level view of where ESSER currently stands. And one thing I do want to note is on the OPI website, so opi.mt.gov, when you scroll to the right side, you'll see a tab for ESSER, and all of this information is contained on there as well. We do a lot of updates on a monthly basis, so I did want to just point that out, that the document that was provided to you is from a review as of December, and it does continue to go forward. So all of that information is available to you. At the top of that document that was provided for you, you'll see ESSER is broken into 3 different funding streams. So we've got ESSER 1, which is often referred to as CARES, ESSER 2, which is CARISA, and then ESSER 3, which is ARP. And it indicates the amount that was allocated out to the state, what has been expended, and then the current balance. We've pretty much spent all of ESSER 1. The final expenditure reports have been completed, and that one is pretty much done, and we're moving into the 2 and 3 side. The chart that I have below, the pie chart, I do apologize, the numbers did not show up in there. So the blue, just to give you an indication, is 48%, the gray is 17%, and the orange is 35%. And on the left-hand side, I've got sort of a breakdown of what all of those percentages mean. When districts go in and utilize the funds through e-grants, the grant manager that we have, software, they indicate what area of spending they're going to use. And that's a determination that they make. And then I just sort of capsulized those together, knowing the descriptions that they're actually using, and put them into these instructional needs subcategory, or the whole child wellness, or other services. The main thing, though, that I wanted to highlight is the fact that these funds are being used in very innovative ways and crossing over a lot of different areas. And so I put in there a couple of examples. One is the career and tech vocational trades, in which case we've got a district that is making teeny houses. So they're taking students off site using ESSER funds for the transportation, for also having a building that they can create these teeny houses in. And then they're bringing the students back in the afternoon or in different time periods so that they can get the core math and reading, but they also go off site to actually make these products or these trades skills, and they tie in very well. So that kind of crossover is happening a lot with these funds. Another area that occurred was an offsite kitchen that was need of significant repair, and in bringing that kitchen on site, attaching it to the alternative school, they were able to then provide not only better service in terms of the food for their schools in general, but also allow for CTE training or culinary arts directly on site. And so some of the COVID funds, some of these ESSER funds have been used in those areas that maybe a district had a project that they were thinking of doing for a while, but just didn't have the funds to start it. And now they have the funds to actually do some of those starts that also benefit tremendously the lost instructional time that occurred initially with COVID. So I just wanted to kind of give that overview. Again, on the OPI website, we do have a lot of information. We have training sessions that we're doing all the time with regards to allowable use of these funds and how to document that. We've also got just how the funds are being used each month. That is reported out to the trustees. And then also it has it by district. So there's a large PDF that you can go in, anyone can go in and just look at how are these funds being allocated in these larger categories. Just also as another public view and the transparency that we're trying to do, an individual can actually go into the district budget descriptions through eGrants, and there's a public view through that as well. Are there any questions that you have with regards to this sort of high level, quick snapshot of ESSER?
Hi, Wendy. This is Hannah Meeskins. I'm the Whitehall Superintendent. Thank you for your recent help with my ESSER 3 amendment. I do have a question, and perhaps this access at the budgetary level for each district is where I can find this, but regarding how much of this money is being used for salary and benefits of positions that might be eliminated once this money actually goes away. So, for example, in my district, coded as minimizing the spread of infection, we have an HVAC upgrade, which occurred. And then I also have additional custodial staff, which was, which obviously once this money, expires, essentially I will have to budget for, or the position will have to go away. I've heard in discussions with other superintendents that, they've hired instructional staff, teachers, paras, and so on using this money. Do you have any sense of that kind of impact down the road? What sort of implications this might have for a couple of years from now?
So I think the question you're asking is if districts have, because the expenditure of funds is at a district level, so each district can decide differently how they're spending the funds. Right. And therefore, if staffing is being funded out of ESSER, say for an extra counselor or an extra paraprofessional, what will happen to those positions after ESSER funds are gone? And I think that's is that the question? Okay.
Yeah, not so much what will happen to those positions. Obviously, that's something that they'll have to decide, but do you have a sense of statewide how many positions might be affected?
No, I don't have a document that tells in terms of how many positions are being funded out of the ESSER funds. We will be doing data collection in the next month or two. We haven't gotten full documentation from the Department of Ed yet as to when that will occur. One of the questions on that is, are you funding are you funding full-time equivalent positions out of ESSER funding? So we do get that answer in there, and we will have a better idea once that data reporting has been done.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Elder, I have one question too. When are the funds expected to expire?
So each one of the funds expired, if you think of that Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, a year in advance. So ESSER 1 expired September of 22, ESSER 2 expires September of 23, and ESSER 3 expires September of 24. The question that has come up a lot is are there going to be any liquidation extensions? And we don't have an answer for that. They did give one for ESSER 1 very late in the game, and we continue to ask whether or not that will be true with 2 and 3. And so far, we have not gotten guidance other than to redirect that it was only for 1. So it is something that's on the radar for us to continue to ask that question.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Wendy, thank you for the update. Council members, any other questions?
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. And if at any point there are any questions, feel free to reach out to the ESSER team. We're always willing to help walk through or answer any questions that we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, council members, nice work. Next on the agenda, we have the teacher residency program. Are those folks in line?
So, Mr. Chair, we do have Esty Aiken who's on and is joining you now. She's from the Educator Preparation Program at UM Western. We were also hoping to have Principal Standard with you from Victor Schools, but unfortunately, this is the season. She's a sick kiddo who we have to take to the doctor. So we'll just have Esty today. So I on your table in front of you, we had prepared some questions. They may not all be relevant now, but I think Esty probably has enough. Dr. Aiken has a good idea of probably what's happening in the field. So if you wanted to kind of tailor those a little bit, knowing that we still have EPP here to ask questions of, certainly we can try to get some cool folks at your meeting in April too, if you would like.
Dr. Aiken, thanks for coming today. How you doing?
I am well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate every opportunity to talk with CSPAC.
Excellent. Good to see that blazing W on your vest.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
thank you. And I'll just wait on your questions. So
Absolutely. Council members, any questions for Dr. Aiken this time?
Maybe you could just clarify how the teacher residency program differs from general student teaching. What it entails to get the stipend, those kind of things.
So the major differences between the residency and traditional student teaching is that the residency requires a year. So they are placed with a mentor. That does not differ. So in the same way that a student teacher would have a mentor teacher, our residents all have mentor teachers, but the length of the residency is twice what's expected of a traditional student teacher. And in most cases, it's more than double the length because we expect a resident to be there from when their mentor teacher reports for initial PIR till the mentor teacher closes out the year. So the residents are required to follow the academic calendar of their host school, not their EPP. And that's a major difference. As far as what they're required to do to receive their stipend, they participate both in showing up every day and doing the work that they are to do as a resident in the classroom. They also attend external trainings, and I can't speak to those. Those are offered through the OPI, through the Mighty Network. So I'm not totally sure what goes on there, but I know that there is an external requirement as well there. Additional differences, 20% of their day is released for coursework because for many of these students, they still have classes to complete. So they are allowed, I shouldn't say 20% of the day, 20% of the school week, because in our districts where it's a 4-day week, they're allowed Friday, which is sometimes modified because maybe their mentor teacher is required to be at PIR on Friday. All of the schools are approaching that in different ways, but we're hearing very positive feedback that that does allow them to not feel overwhelmed with their coursework and being in the residency. Major difference, they are paid, and their tuition this year is fully covered because they get $3,000 from OPI as a scholarship flow through money. And then because all of our students this year in the residency are at an MUS institution, they're either at Western or at OCHI generously provided money to close the gap on tuition, and that money will not be available next year. So we are thinking about that, because while it's very helpful for a student to be paid and they have a housing stipend that comes from the district, if they are still then required to pay tuition, that washes out their living stipend. And so we're trying to address that so that it's a full wraparound package financially.
Other questions? Please.
Could you update us on the participants? I know you did mention it previously before, but just to kind of refresh our memory about how many participants have been through and you anticipate will come through.
Yeah, so this year we have 18 participants. 2 of those are at 16 of those are at Western. Of those, and I should have written it down, we have significant tribal participation. I think it's 10. I think we have 6 in Browning and 4 related to LBHC. So we already had 2+2 partnerships with Blackfeet Community College and Little Bighorn College. And so those individuals were ready to student teach in their areas in cohort. Slight difference with those students too, many of them are already paraprofessionals in the building. So we just transitioned them from paras to residents. And then of our traditional students, 2 of those are place-based in Victor, which it's too bad that Jamie can't join us because I think she's having a very positive experience with her 2 residents. And then we have 1 in Trout Creek, 1 in Cayuse Prairie, and 1 in Townsend. And usually folks say, but Townsend isn't rural. And the program, to the best of my understanding, has expanded beyond rural to hard to staff. And so that Townsend request came through very late, based on a Western student who had worked in a summer camp over the summer, and Townsend reached out to fill, basically to address a shortage area. But the students, to be clear, residents cannot be lead teachers. They cannot be on an emergency license. So they addressed a large class size by inviting a resident to help with that large class size, and that's working out very well. So those are kind of the profiles of our current students.
Thank you.
Excellent question. Other questions?
Chair Elder, I have a question. So I know they can't be the lead teacher, but I know sometimes some districts kind of do a workaround almost, that the mentor teacher may be the one subbing and not the student teacher. You see where I'm going? So is there
Yes.
some paperwork they need to find to ensure that that doesn't happen?
We have a statewide policy around student teachers, and our residents fall under the same policy. Student teachers are allowed to sub 5 days during their student teaching placement. And so our residents are allowed 10 because they're there for 2 semesters. They are allowed to only sub in their own classroom, and they have to be approved by their school boards just like any other substitute would. So that is an agreement through the Council of Deans. We are consistent across all 10 EPPs so that student teachers are not taken advantage of. During COVID, we did allow 10 subbing days, but that has been retracted. We are back to 5 days per semester. And if we were gonna get into the weeds, that's halfway through their placement. So they cannot sub straight out of the gates. They cannot be leveraged to meet the needs of the sub shortage. So that's broadly something we're addressing beyond the residency. And actually Trent could probably speak to what's going on at around there, but it's my understanding that we all use that sub policy statewide.
Dr. Aiken, the last time we got introduced to this program, I believe there was discussion about the resources and capital needed, the human resources to have the program succeed. And I guess that's a salute to you and your efforts. But beyond that, there was certainly interest from the other campuses around the state in the residency program. What do you see as the biggest challenges if such a rollout were to happen? How could it happen? I mean, what would this look like? Can you hypothesize for us?
Yeah, we're really brainstorming that right now. We're in a variety of discussions around how to efficiently implement this program. So one idea that has been floated, but I want to be clear, it has not been settled on, is that Western, it's been called a hub and spoke model, that Western would be the fiscal agent, and then we would work with the other 10 EPPs. One of the intricacies and a reason that Western was ready to kind of hit the ground running is that we already offer robust online programming where many other EPPs do not. So when we're saying, well, this student is poised to student teach the semester after next, so they're ready for the residency, they're ready for a full year away, we had those classes available and many other EPPs did not. And so that's one thing that we would like to tackle. We've spent the last 2 days in Council of Deans having conversations around what that might look like, how we share classes. I don't know how, falling apart around here, and I apologize. I don't know what just happened.
Really exciting.
Really exciting. That's the most exciting thing that's happened in this EPP in a long time. I apologize. Ooh, back to it. So we were discussing what it would take to get all 10 EPPs involved in this, and we don't know yet. One of the intricacies that we're trying to look at is shared coursework, which works within the MUS now as we move to Quotely. And I don't know if you're familiar with Quotely, but a shared platform for registering students for courses across the MUS. But of course, the question came up right away, how does that impact our privates and our tribals? So how do they get involved in that work? Carol and Rocky and our tribal partners. So those are all things that we continue to look at. We are also starting to look beyond this 3-year pilot. So we are into year 1 of the pilot. We have 2 more years that are funded through CARES money, I believe, and that OPI could speak to that. So we are headed into year 2. And now as a state, we're starting to look at what does sustainability of a residency look like. I know that there are some bills being run. I won't speak to those because I don't know about them. We're looking at apprenticeships. We have a meeting later today to look at apprenticeships. So all of that is to say, we don't know, but we are looking at lots of options. And we are trying to figure out the best way to allow all EPPs who are interested, because not all EPPs are, any EPP who is interested to allow them to address residency in the way that makes sense for them in their area. So for example, MSUB, Billings has a shortage of teachers, or they certainly want to have a grow your own pipeline, just like most districts. And it would make best sense that MSUB was tackling that in a place-based way. So those are all conversations that we continue to have. Right now, we are also trying to address how to make the connection between the interested students and the interested schools. Those do not always align. So a student who says, I would like to participate in this residency, I had one in my office recently. I said, the residency may have a position in Ekalaka. Are you interested in Ekalaka? And not only are you interested in Ekalaka, no school that recruits a resident wants them to leave after the first year. That's not why they're inviting a resident. They're inviting a resident for someone to come and stay and engage in their school for a long period of time. So we're trying to navigate the sometimes misalignment of the schools that are trying to recruit teachers to our students. And we do that in a variety of ways. Traditional undergrads are looking for things when they leave their programs. Non-traditional students are looking for different things. Our place-based students are looking for different things. So trying to navigate the matches are something that we're tackling as a state as well.
Thank you. Other questions?
Am I correct that the district, the participating district has to pay the housing cost of the participants? Is that accurate?
It's accurate and depends on each district. So and it gets really muddy here because it is OPI's program, but I speak collectively quite a bit. What was asked of the districts for their commitment to the program was to provide housing. And districts have gone about that in a variety of ways. So some of the ways that are being utilized right now, the initial ask was a housing stipend to pay rent or mortgage. And in Browning, that's $1,000. In Lodge Grass, that's $800. Each district decided what that housing stipend would be. 800 was kind of the bottom threshold, and Browning decided to exceed that. In one district, they are using a teacherage. They are using the house that's associated with the school and owned by the district. Our two, and Trent could speak to this, it's my understanding that the 2 students at UM are being provided mileage because they are living at home and driving to their placements. And there was a district that wanted to participate that did not have a resident match, that had made an arrangement to rent an Airbnb because there just wasn't housing in the area. So every district has been asked to approach that in the way that makes the most sense for them and whatever their school board sees as most advantageous financially.
Any other questions?
Did we talk about the future yet? Like the next year rollout, or other than the unknown finances?
Yeah, and some things are predictable because when this pilot program started, we knew that it would be a 3-year program. So it's not predictable beyond. The realities of where we are right now is that OPI would like us to recruit 60 students into year 2. The target for year 1 was 30 students, and we only got to 18. So I don't know where that puts us heading into year 2. And then in year 3, they would like 120 residents. And I can't, setting that bar, I don't know that we'll be able to meet it. And there are a variety of moving parts about whether or not we'll be able to meet it. Other things that we do know about the future, we have been told that the stipends, the financial arrangements will remain the same into the next year. One thing that I would like to look at, but I don't know, I'm not on the grant, so I'm not on the, I haven't seen the fiscal side of how things are appropriated as far as line items. I would like to see some of that carryover from last year, those 12 slots that weren't filled, potentially added to the pool for tuition reduction, so that we could get our students closer to 0. Other things that have come up, the tuition waiver does not cover books and fees. It does not cover their insurance, things of that nature. That has been a little bit complicated because several of our students left their jobs as paras that did provide insurance and then had to go back on student insurance. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, eyes wide open heading into the next 2 years. And at this point, we don't have the list of schools yet. And so none of the EPPs have made a 100% commitment. We certainly want to partner as best we can. And we see this as incredibly advantageous to our students. But right now we don't have all the necessary pieces in place to make a 100% commitment. So we continue to have almost daily conversations within the EPPs and with OPI and with OCHI. OCHI is very involved with the MUS schools in how we'll be successful in this program. And we're just, I'm sure you can understand that that's a lot of coordination. None of those agencies is small. So it's a lot of meetings and a lot of coordination. What we ultimately hope in the next 2 years and then beyond is that this benefits our students. You are all educators and know that it is not cheap to get an education, and we are not signing up for a job with a large mean income. So we are trying to make that as practical a process as possible. And we will continue to look at that for long-term sustainability.
Excellent. Any other questions? Dr. Aiken, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I apologize if I caused anyone a heart attack. That was a lot of excitement on my end. So
I think it was more exciting for you than us. We just
okay. I'm glad that makes me happy too. I look forward to see
on the screen. We saw the screen on the
I don't know, I
screen,
didn't
and then we
really
got to
notice
see
that.
your elevated blood pressure, but that was it.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. Well, thank you. And I look forward to our next shared meeting with MCDE.
I don't.
Thank you very much.
Oh.
Council members, turning to our agenda, item 3, the Class 8 review. We were unable to look at some transcripts. Were those transcripts for Megan Bailey?
No,
No, they.
I think.
That
We've got a different name.
So I believe we have a, with maiden name, transcript from the University of Montana for a degree in psychology. That's what we were missing to make a determination earlier today. I think we can justly assume that that is the maiden name. And assuming so, we can probably take action on that and not have this poor candidate waiting for our next meeting. Is everybody able to find that email that Chris sent? Thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
I'd entertain a motion.
Even though it's not an official transcript, so that it's not an official transcript, I think that we should accept it and include the class 8 request for psychology.
And what was her second name? Was very good. Farmer. Thank you. Any other, is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded that Megan Bailey Farmer be granted a class 8 license in psychology as an discussion. Seeing none, which are any. I'm losing one. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to an immediate vote. Those in favor of granting the said class 8 license, please respond by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. We therefore shall grant Megan her class 8 license in psychology. Thank you, people. Coming back to the agenda. We have future agenda items. Obviously,
So Mr. Chair, you see on there, it says review draft annual report. I think what we'll do, depending on how House Bill 231 makes its way through, we'll have one ready for your approval. If you have some changes, we can make those, but we probably want you to be able to approve that so we can send that to the board. A couple other things on my list. I do want to have a formal approval time for you guys to make recommendations to the board around elements that you would like to see in any advisory councils. And then we'll work with Crystal to make sure that she is prepared to bring any and all class 8 licenses she has at that time, given that we don't know what that will look like moving forward. So just want to prepare for that. Those are 3 things on my list. If you have any other thoughts for April, please let me know.
I had framed the same idea to provide these and suggestions to get the board about how to continue serving the needs of Montana students, and I would argue to maintain our quality public education system. Anything else? No? I would entertain. Oh, any public comment? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Merman Butcher. I'm the Deputy Director of Montana Programs for Education. NOFE is made up of parents and community members that trust our public school educators, and as such, we really value teacher input. As I stated at the hearing for EC 231, we believe that every conversation around changes in policies affecting our teachers and students should include as many current educators as possible. We would really like to thank CSPAC for its thoughtful voice, especially on issues pertaining to teacher ethics, licensure, and accreditation. We recognize the value of your hard work over the years, your experience as professional educators, and the perspectives that you bring to the table. We just wanted to give you a thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate that. Any other public comments, especially if it's as glowing as that was? Seeing none. Thank you for coming today, people. Thank you for online participants, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, please respond by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Thank you to the staff. Thank you to the members. Thank you for your time. Meeting adjourned.
See you all in April.